This week in America, power wasn't just used, it was flexed. Donald Trump began by firing watchdogs, raiding factories, and cooking the jobs report. Midweek, an assassination shocked the nation, but even before facts came in, the narrative was written: blame the left, sanctify the martyr, and militarize the response. By the weekend, troops were promised for Memphis and Louisiana, benefits were slashed for the disabled and poor, and tariffs tightened the chokehold on working families. This is not a collection of isolated headlines. It's a map, and every road on it leads to one destination: more power at the top, less protection at the bottom. Welcome to the Trump Report. Monday, the firing and the raids. We start the week with a 1-2 punch. The Supreme Court gives the White House leeway to fire watchdogs, and DHS stages its biggest immigration raids in decades. Let's break it down. FTC Commissioner fired, independents on trial. Chief Justice Roberts issued a stay letting Trump sideline FTC Commissioner Rebecca Slaughter, despite statutory protections. Case now headed to full Supreme Court review. Implication: watchdogs designed to be independent are now one firing away from political capture. Immigration raids, Operation Midway Blitz. DHS agents descended on factories, neighborhoods, and even bus stations in Chicago and Atlanta. Hundreds detained, families scattered. Witnesses described it as a military operation. Implication: beyond arrests, raids are psychological warfare, showing who controls the factory floor and the neighborhood street. Monday told us oversight is optional, and fear is policy. That's how the week began. Tuesday, the jobs mirage and tariff power. Tuesday ripped the mask off the economy and tested the limits of emergency power. The jobs revision. BLS revealed the U.S. added 911,000 fewer jobs than reported, the biggest downward revision in history. Coming weeks after Trump fired BLS chief Erica McIntyre, critics call it cooking the numbers by intimidation. Implication: neutral data is no longer neutral when careers end for reporting bad news. Tariffs on the docket. Supreme Court fast-tracks challenge to IEEPA tariffs. Stakes: hundreds of billions in refunds if struck down. Trump calls them my tariffs, my choice. Implication: if upheld, presidents can weaponize emergency laws to tax the world at will. Tuesday revealed an economy weaker than advertised, and a presidency stronger than designed. It's a referendum on emergency powers maximalism in economic policy. If the court reins it in, a major plank of unilateral tariff making could crumble. Wednesday, September 10th. What happened? Reports highlight Poland shooting down Russian drones intruding on its airspace. Global tensions color U.S. security posture. SCOTUS formally puts the tariff cases on its November calendar. Primetime newscasts lean into economic slowdown storylines. Why it matters for liberty. Perma-emergency mindset: external threats justify internal crackdowns. Expect more domestic security operations framed as readiness. Wednesday, September 10th. Reports highlight Poland shooting down Russian drones intruding on its airspace. Global tensions color U.S. security posture. SCOTUS formally puts the tariff cases on its November calendar. Follow through from Tuesday. Primetime newscasts lean into economic slowdown storylines. Why it matters for liberty. Perma-emergency mindset: external threats justify internal crackdowns. Expect more domestic security operations framed as readiness. It was the moment that shook the week. Conservative activist Charlie Kirk was gunned down in broad daylight during a Turning Point USA event in Utah. Within minutes, shock turned into speculation, and speculation into blame. Tonight, we break down not only the killing itself, but also how the narrative was seized, twisted, and weaponized before facts were even known. The shooting itself. Timeline, around 12:20 to 12:26 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time, shots rang out from a rooftop at Utah Valley University in Orem. Kirk collapsed on stage. He was rushed to a hospital but pronounced dead. Scene reports, police dispatch audio described a masked man prone on the library roof with a long rifle. Shell casings were recovered there. Community shock, students, staff, and attendees were locked down as helicopters swept overhead. The manhunt v. arrest. FBI released rooftop surveillance stills and video within hours. For 2 days, the suspect was unknown, but rumors exploded online. On Friday, police announced the arrest of Tyler Robinson, 22. Evidence included a bolt-action rifle and family tips after Robinson allegedly admitted involvement. The rush to blame the left. President Trump immediately blamed radical left lunatics before any suspect was identified. Representative Derek Van Orden, Republican Wisconsin, posted, "The gloves are off. The left-wing political violence must stop now." He even warned Democrats were leading America into a civil war. Across social media, hashtags linked the shooting to Democrats, Antifa, or the far left, despite no evidence. The fact-check v. pushback. News outlets stressed, "We don't know who the shooter is yet." APV-NBC debunked viral claims falsely linking the shooter to DSA or other leftist groups. Utah Governor Spencer Cox urged restraint, "Only the shooter is responsible. Do not weaponize this tragedy." Why it matters. Presumption versus politics, pinning blame before facts weaponizes grief and undercuts due process. Dangerous rhetoric, talk of civil war from sitting lawmakers raises the temperature in a country already on edge. Misinformation velocity, false claims spread faster than corrections, they shape partisan memory even after debunking. Public trust, when leaders substitute narrative for evidence, citizens lose faith in the system's ability to separate fact from fury. Charlie Kirk's death is a tragedy. But the story of Wednesday is not only the killing, it's how America responded. Before a suspect was named, fingers were pointed, enemies were declared, and division deepened. Tyranny doesn't just rise from government power, it also grows when leaders weaponize grief into blame. Thursday, martyrdom and messaging. On the 9/11 anniversary, the White House turned grief into power, canonizing Charlie Kirk, while doubling down on law and order. Flags at half-staff and Medal of Freedom. Trump orders flags lowered nationwide. Announces Kirk will receive the Presidential Medal of Freedom posthumously. Implication, symbols unify, but they also sanctify. Kirk becomes a martyr for a movement, narrative controlled by the executive. Investigation updates. FBI confirms family tip led to suspect Tyler Robinson's arrest. DOJ promises maximum penalties. Implication, the narrative is tightly framed, a lone gunman, maximum justice, zero nuance. Thursday showed us the state's power to define heroes, frame villains, and bind tragedy into its own mythology. Friday, the rollback and the bullets. The week ended with 3 blows: transparency dimmed, healthcare weaponized, and immigration enforcement turned deadly. EPA transparency rollback. EPA moves to end the greenhouse gas reporting program, 8,000 polluters freed from public disclosure. Implication, what you don't measure, you can't fight. Pollution becomes invisible by policy. Medicaid and Planned Parenthood. Appeals court lets Trump block reimbursements while lawsuits proceed. Immediate hit to care access for low-income patients. Implication, healthcare is no longer a right, it's a bargaining chip. ICE shooting, Chicago's suburb. In Franklin Park, Illinois, ICE officer fatally shoots man during arrest. DHS cites surge in assaults on agents. Implication, enforcement framed as combat, civilians framed as combatants. Friday's message was clear: less oversight, less care, more force. The rulebook shrinks while the badge expands. Saturday, September 13th, new developments. What happened Saturday? 1. Plan to deploy National Guard to Louisiana cities. The Trump administration is drafting a plan for 1,000 National Guard troops to be deployed in Louisiana, New Orleans, Baton Rouge, for law enforcement missions. Purposes cited: drug interdiction, logistical support, policing. Some critics argue it's federal overreach. Normal law enforcement should be local. National Guard involvement in urban policing traditionally limited by posse comitatus and state oversight. 2. Memphis National Guard deployment announcement. Trump said he would send the National Guard to Memphis, Tennessee, to tackle rising crime, even though local officials said they had not requested the deployment, so word came first from Trump via TV. The mayor expressed concern about how troops will operate, what rules of engagement will look like, and whether this sets a precedent for unilateral federal militarization of cities. 3. Charlie Kirk funeral arrangements. Funeral scheduled for September 21, 2025 in Glendale, Arizona. Trump confirmed he will attend. Kirk's widow Erica pledged to push forward with his mission. Flags remain at half-staff until Sunday. 4. Escalation in rhetoric v. policy proposals. Trump calling for the death penalty for Charlie Kirk's assassin. Plans under discussion to deploy military force or guard in urban centers, Louisiana, Memphis, under the guise of crime emergency or public safety. Additional stories around how his administration changes names and roles, like renaming Defense Directorate to War Directorate, increase the Marshall narrative. Saturday adds more weight. First, a plan is taking shape to send National Guard troops into Louisiana cities, New Orleans, Baton Rouge, for policing and drug enforcement, even without those cities asking. In Memphis, Trump announced the Guard again on TV before local leaders were consulted. Then came arrangements for Charlie Kirk's funeral, with flags half-staff and Trump promising to attend. Through it all, the message is unmistakable: escalation, not de-escalation. Law and order isn't just rhetoric, it's being armed, deployed, and memorialized. Sunday, September 14th, the spin v. backlash. Key stories v. reactions. 1. Memphis mayor pushes back. Memphis Mayor Paul Young says he only learned from Trump's TV announcement about the deployment of National Guard troops to his city. He says local officials had not formally requested it. He is certainly not happy and expressed concern about how the Guard will be used. 2. Louisiana deployment plan leaks. Pentagon documents reveal plans to send 1,000 National Guard troops into urban parts of Louisiana for law enforcement tasks. Local lawmakers are worried about overreach, about whether these troops will be under state or federal control. 3. Flag order compliance v. defiance. Trump issued an order for U.S. flags to be flown at half-staff in memory of Charlie Kirk until sunset on September 14th. Some states, e.g., New York, New Jersey, did not comply. They cited state protocols/jurisdiction limits, stirring conservative accusations of defying presidential authority. 4. Push to remove Fed Governor Lisa Cook. The Trump administration renewed efforts to fire Fed board member Lisa Cook via appeal court before a key interest rate vote. Seen by critics as another move to influence independent bodies and shape policy around economic levers. 5. Rhetoric escalation. Trump remains furious over Charlie Kirk's assassination, saying that he fears he and other GOP figures might be next. He reiterated calls for the death penalty for the shooter and blamed radical left movements. Eric Trump appeared on Fox News, paid tribute to Kirk, and then used the spotlight to promote his new memoir, framing political violence as part of a broader war on conservatives. These Sunday actions are all about control of narrative: who speaks first, who owns the tragic moment, who decides what's normal. The deployments and Guard plans push the envelope on executive involvement in cities. They test the boundary of federal versus local power, especially when local consent is unclear. The moves against Fed independence signal that judiciary and regulatory oversight are still under pressure. The mix of mourning, threat, policy, self-promotion shows how political theater and governance are blending. Tragedy becomes mechanism, memorial becomes platform. Today, Trump went on the offense. First, in Memphis, officials say they only heard about the National Guard deployment when Trump told the country on TV, not when leaders were consulted. Meanwhile, in Louisiana, plans emerged to flood urban centers with 1,000 Guard troops. It's the same playbook: executive decision, local confusion, federal boots creeping into law enforcement. Flags were ordered half-staff for Charlie Kirk until sunset, symbolic power. But New York and New Jersey said no, citing state protocol. And Trump pushed again to remove a Fed governor ahead of a rate vote, underscoring just how much levers he's pulling. At its core, Sunday reveals what this week has aimed to build: narrative control. He sets the terms, makes the accusations, draws the lines, whether through monument, mandate, or memory. Trump's moves of the week. Narrative control: Kirk's death becomes a rallying point. Funerals, martyr language, heavy blame rhetoric used to mobilize base and define enemies. Militarization v. Guard deployments, pushing Guard units into cities, suggesting use of force first, normalizing federal force in domestic settings. Law enforcement elevated above local governance, whether it's ICE raids or Guard missions in Memphis or Louisiana. Trump is expanding federal reach into areas traditionally controlled locally. Judicial and symbolic muscle, courthouse rulings, tariff cases, EPA rollbacks, together with high-profile symbolic acts medals, funeral attendants build both policy and myth. Before we close tonight, let's talk about Trump's attack on the poor. This week saw a series of moves that don't just restate priorities, they make poverty more dangerous, benefits harder to get, and survival riskier for millions. Take SSI, disability and elderly benefit payments that help people barely staying afloat, facing new cuts if someone in their household gets SNAP. Nearly 400,000 people could lose payment amounts or lose eligibility entirely. Then there's SNAP and Medicaid, once essential programs becoming conditional, with work requirements, frequent eligibility checks, and less federal cushion for states. Caregivers and families are already saying they fear losing their capacity to care for loved ones at home. Meanwhile, Trump's tariff regime isn't just about trade, it's pushing up costs of everything for low-income Americans. Prospective analysis suggests hundreds of thousands more might be pushed below the poverty line because of rising everyday expenses. Even programs like Head Start are under threat. Child welfare, early education for poor kids, immigrant families, all are exposed. These aren't tweaks. They're attacks. When benefits become conditional, when oversight becomes burdensome, when state support pulls back, that's power stripped from the poor. And that's the final thread this week in the Trump report. Because at this scale, it's not just policy, it's a reshaping of what safety means in America. At its core, Sunday reveals what this week has aimed to build: narrative control. He sets the terms, makes the accusations, draws the lines, whether through monument, mandate, or memory. Trump's moves of the week. Narrative control: Kirk's death becomes a rallying point. Funerals, martyr language, heavy blame rhetoric used to mobilize base and define enemies. Militarization v. Guard deployments, pushing Guard units into cities, suggesting use of force first, normalizing federal force in domestic settings. Law enforcement elevated above local governance, whether it's ICE raids or Guard missions in Memphis or Louisiana. Trump is expanding federal reach into areas traditionally controlled locally. Judicial and symbolic muscle, courthouse rulings, tariff cases, EPA rollbacks, together with high-profile symbolic acts medals, funeral attendants build both policy and myth. And before we close, let's face the harshest truth of this week: Trump's attack on the poor. On August 7, the administration moved to slash supplemental security income. Nearly 400,000 disabled and elderly Americans face losing money, some losing benefits entirely, if they live in households that get SNAP. A cruel penalty for poverty itself. Add to that, SNAP and Medicaid cuts under the One Big Beautiful bill. work requirements rise, coverage shrinks, and states are told to make do with less. Families who depend on food and healthcare now live with new fear. Tariffs, too, not just trade war headlines. They raise the price of clothes, cookware, electronics, pushing as many as 875,000 more Americans into poverty. And Head Start, Trump tried to block undocumented children from classrooms. A court stopped it, but the message is clear: even preschool can be weaponized. This is not trimming budgets. It is structural punishment. It makes poverty more expensive, disability more isolating, survival more conditional. And that's the final pattern of the week: raids, rollbacks, rhetoric, and an economy where the poor pay first, last, and always. That's Trump's attack on the poor. And that's the Trump Report. In closing, and so, the week ends where it began, with power shifting upward and the people left exposed. From watchdogs removed to factories raided. From job numbers manipulated to tariffs that punish the poor. From a political assassination spun into propaganda to the National Guard deployed on city streets. Even the safety nets, SSI, SNAP, Medicaid, were pulled tighter, leaving the most vulnerable hanging by a thread. The pattern is clear: crisis, control, consolidation. Every day, a new test of how much can be taken, how far lines can be pushed, how quickly resistance can be worn down. This is not just a presidency, it is a redefinition of governance itself. Thank you for watching the Trump Report. Please like, comment, and subscribe below. Until next time.